Judd, the plastic revolution. The workshop air hung thick with polymer dust and the acrid smell of testing compounds as Gaston Glock pressed his calloused fingers against the prototype's frame one final time. January snow fell silently outside the small Austrian factory, but inside, under harsh fluorescent lights, a revolution was taking shape, one that would challenge everything the firearms world believed about handgun design. The black polymer frame felt alien in his hands, lighter than any pistol had a right to be. For months, colleagues in Vienna's industrial circles had whispered behind his back, "A curtain rod maker thinks he can revolutionize pistols?" They muttered over coffee in the city's engineering firms. The mockery still stung, but it had also driven him through countless sleepless nights of calculations and prototyping. At 52, Gaston Glock had built a successful business manufacturing knives, grenades, and military hardware for the Austrian army, but he had never designed a pistol in his life. Yet in his hands lay what would become the most controversial and transformative sidearm of the modern era. The year was 1980, and the Austrian military had issued an unprecedented challenge that had sent shockwaves through the established firearms industry. They wanted a new service pistol, something lighter, more reliable, and radically different from the heavy steel weapons that had dominated battlefields for decades. Traditional gun manufacturers had scoffed at the specifications. 17 rounds in the magazine, a striker-fired system, minimal moving parts. It was engineering fantasy, they claimed. The established giants, Sig Sauer, Heckler and Koch Steyr, had submitted their conventional designs, confident that decades of proven craftsmanship would triumph over what they saw as Austrian bureaucratic wishful thinking. But Gaston Glock saw opportunity where others saw impossibility. His secretary knocked on the workshop door, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Glock, the test results from yesterday's trials are ready." He set down the prototype and walked to his desk, where the official Austrian military report lay waiting. The numbers told a story that would reshape the world. 15,000 rounds fired without major failure. The P-80 prototype, his plastic pistol, had not only met the military's requirements, it had exceeded them by margins that silenced every skeptic. Glock's childhood in war-torn Austria had taught him that survival belonged to those who adapted fastest. Born in 1929, he had witnessed the collapse of empires and the birth of new orders. His father, a railway worker, had drummed into him the value of precision and reliability, lessons that echoed now as he contemplated the weapon that would strip away everything unnecessary from traditional pistol design. Where others saw complexity as craftsmanship, Glock saw vulnerability. Every additional spring, every extra mechanism was another point of failure when a soldier's life hung in the balance. His approach had been methodical, almost scientific. He had purchased examples of the world's leading pistols, the Browning High Power, the Walther P38, the Colt 1911, and disassembled them completely, studying each component with the clinical eye of an engineer who understood manufacturing tolerances better than gunfighting doctrine. The breakthrough had come not in a moment of inspiration, but through months of systematic analysis. Polymers, the advanced plastics he used in his military contracts, could replace steel in the frame without sacrificing strength. The firearms establishment had recoiled in horror. Plastic guns? It was heresy against centuries of steel and wood tradition. But Glock had pressed forward, driven by data rather than tradition. The striker-fired mechanism he developed required 65% fewer parts than conventional designs. Fewer parts meant fewer failures, easier maintenance, and dramatically reduced manufacturing costs. Now, holding the test report, he understood that he had created something that would extend far beyond Austrian military barracks. This wasn't just a pistol, it was the beginning of a transformation that would reshape global firearms culture in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Outside, the January snow continued to fall on the quiet factory grounds. Inside, under those harsh fluorescent lights, the future was taking shape in black polymer and precision engineering. What Gaston Glock had built would soon carry his name into police holsters, military arsenals, and conflicts around the world, along with consequences he had never intended and could never fully control. If stories like this make you question what you'd do in someone else's boots, tell us in the comments how you imagine you'd react in this workshop. And stay with us for the next chapters. The Austrian military's final evaluation trials would begin in 3 weeks, and Glock knew that 17 competitors from the world's most prestigious manufacturers would be watching his every move. The testing protocol was brutal, extreme temperature cycling from -40 Celsius to +70, immersion tests in mud and sand, and drop tests from 6 feet onto concrete. Everything he had worked toward would be decided in those grueling assessments. In his modest office overlooking the factory floor, Glock reviewed the competition. Steyr, Austria's own established firearms manufacturer, had submitted their conventional design with supreme confidence. Their engineers had decades of experience and a reputation built on the finest steel craftsmanship. Heckler & Koch had sent their latest polymer-framed prototype, but it still relied on traditional mechanisms that Glock considered overly complex. "They think we're amateurs," his chief engineer, Friedrich Deschamps, said as he placed technical drawings on Glock's desk. "The Steyr people are already celebrating. They believe their all-steel construction will outlast our plastic toy." The Glock studied the comparison charts that showed his P-80 design against the competition. On paper, his pistol seemed almost too simple. Where other manufacturers had included dozens of springs, pins, and mechanisms, his striker-fired system reduced the parts count to an elegant minimum. Military procurement officers had initially shaken their heads. Soldiers would never trust their lives to something that felt so different from what they had always known. But Glock understood something his competitors had missed. He had spent months interviewing Austrian soldiers, asking them about failures in the field, maintenance difficulties, and the real challenges of keeping a weapon functional under combat stress. Their stories had shaped his design philosophy: reliability through simplicity, not complexity through tradition. The early prototypes had faced skepticism even within his own team. When the first polymer frames emerged from the injection molding machines, veteran workers had handled them with obvious doubt. "It feels like a toy," one had muttered, weighing the lightweight frame against the familiar heft of steel. But laboratory testing had revealed the polymer's remarkable properties. Unlike steel, it didn't corrode in moisture, expand significantly with temperature changes, or stress fracture under repeated impact. The synthetic material absorbed shock in ways that actually improved accuracy and reduced felt recoil. Glock's childhood memories of the Second World War had profoundly influenced his thinking. Born in 1929, he had come of age watching empires collapse and new technologies reshape the world. His father, Joseph, had worked on the Austrian railway system, maintaining locomotives that required constant, precise maintenance to function reliably. Those early lessons in precision engineering and the importance of reducing mechanical complexity had stayed with him. "Every extra part is a potential point of failure," he had told his engineers repeatedly. "When a soldier's life depends on 17 rounds firing flawlessly, we cannot afford the luxury of traditional complexity." The polymer frame represented more than just weight savings. Traditional pistols required skilled gunsmiths to fit steel components with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Glock's injection-molded frame could be produced with consistent precision by factory workers using automated equipment. This meant not just lower costs, but guaranteed quality that didn't depend on individual craftsman skill. Friedrich brought him the latest reliability reports from their extended testing. The P-80 had now fired over 20,000 rounds through multiple prototypes without a single mechanical failure serious enough to render the weapon inoperable. Springs broke, slides jammed, and firing pins cracked in the competing designs. But the P-80 kept firing. "The Austrian military is scheduling surprise inspections next week," Friedrich warned. "They want to see our manufacturing process and quality control procedures." Glock nodded, feeling the weight of everything he had built resting on the coming trials. His small company was competing against industrial giants with unlimited resources and decades of military contracts. Success would transform not just his business, but the entire culture of military and police firearms worldwide. Outside the factory windows, snow continued to fall across the Austrian countryside, blanketing the industrial landscape in quiet white. Inside, machines hummed with the precision his father had taught him to value above all else. The revolution taking shape in those workshops would soon spread far beyond Austria's borders, carrying with it consequences that would haunt Glock for the rest of his life. The Austrian military testing facility outside Vienna buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from 18 firearms manufacturers prepared for the final trials. Glock arrived early that March morning, carrying his P-80 prototypes in a simple aluminum case that drew amused glances from competitors with their elaborate presentation boxes and technical teams. Colonel Hans Steiner, the Austrian Army's chief procurement officer, addressed the assembled manufacturers in the facility's main briefing room. "Gentlemen, these trials will determine Austria's service pistol for the next 30 years. We expect perfection under conditions that simulate the worst possible combat scenarios." The testing protocol was indeed brutal. Pistols would be submerged in mud for 24 hours, then fired immediately without cleaning. They would be frozen to -40°C overnight, then heated to +70 degrees, and fired rapidly until barrels glowed. Drop tests from increasing heights would stress every component beyond normal military specifications. Hans Steiner, representing the venerable Austrian firearms company bearing his family name, approached Glock during the morning break. "I hope you understand what you're up against," he said with polite condescension. "Our engineers have been perfecting military pistols since before you were born." "I'm sure they have," Glock replied quietly. "That's exactly why I approach this problem differently." The first day of testing eliminated 6 competitors whose pistols suffered immediate failures in the immersion trials. Water and sand infiltration caused stoppages that required extensive disassembly to clear. By the second day, as temperature cycling began to affect steel components differently, 3 more designs showed critical failures. Friedrich Deschamps watched nervously as Austrian military technicians subjected the P-80 to punishment that seemed designed to break it. "They're being harder on us because we're the unknown quantity," he whispered to Glock. But the P-80 continued functioning through tests that had disabled pistols from Sig Sauer and Heckler & Koch. The polymer frame showed no signs of stress fracture, temperature-related expansion, or corrosion damage. More importantly, the simplified striker-fired mechanism had 65% fewer failure points than conventional designs. During the accuracy trials, something unexpected happened. The P-80's lighter weight and polymer frame actually improved shot groupings by reducing felt recoil and muzzle flip. Soldiers found they could deliver accurate follow-up shots faster than with traditional steel-framed pistols. The 17-round magazine capacity meant they could engage multiple targets without the frequent reloading required by conventional military sidearms. Colonel Steiner pulled Glock aside on the third day as testing continued. "Your design is performing beyond our expectations," he admitted, "but I need to ask directly, will soldiers accept a plastic pistol? Psychological confidence in their weapon is crucial." "Colonel," Glock replied, "soldiers will accept whatever keeps them alive. Once they see this pistol's reliability and capacity, material prejudices become irrelevant." Letters from home had been reaching Glock throughout the testing period, including a particularly moving one from his wife Helga. She wrote of her pride in his achievement, but also her growing concern about the implications of his success. "What kind of world are we creating where such weapons become necessary?" she had asked. By week's end, only 3 pistols remained in the competition, Steyer's traditional steel design, a polymer-framed entry from Heckler & Koch, and Glock's P80. The final test would be the most demanding, continuous firing of 5,000 rounds through each pistol with minimal maintenance intervals. The Steyr pistol failed on round 3047 when repeated heating caused a critical spring to lose tension. The Heckler & Koch design made it to 203 rounds before a firing pin breakage ended its trial. The P80 completed all 5,000 rounds and was still functioning flawlessly when Austrian military observers called a halt to testing. When the smoke cleared, Glock had not only won the contract, he had shattered every assumption about modern pistol design. The Austrian military adopted his creation as the Glock 17, named for its 17-round magazine capacity. But this victory felt strange to him, tinged with an awareness that he had created something whose impact would extend far beyond Austrian military requirements. That evening, in his hotel room overlooking Vienna, Glock sat with the signed contract that would transform his small manufacturing company into a global enterprise. Through his window, he could see the city lights stretching toward the horizon, and he wondered how many of those lights might someday be touched by the consequences of what he had built. Do you think you'd cling to what you were taught back home, or to what your own eyes see in a place like this? Comment which side you'd lean toward, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. By 1982, the Glock 17 had begun its quiet transformation of military and police culture throughout Austria and neighboring countries. Orders were arriving faster than Glock's expanded factory could fulfill them, but success brought complexities he had never anticipated. The first disturbing reports reached his desk on a cold November morning. Intelligence briefings from the Austrian Ministry of Defense indicated that several Glock 17 pistols had appeared in conflicts far from their intended military use. The lightweight polymer frame that made the pistol revolutionary also made it attractive to organizations that needed to move weapons undetected through security systems calibrated for steel firearms. "We never intended this," Friedrich said, reviewing incident reports from border security agencies. "The polymer frame passes through some detection systems as if it's not there." Glock studied photographs of Glock 17 pistols recovered from criminal investigations across Europe. The same engineering elegance that made his design reliable in military hands made it equally effective in situations he had never considered. The weight savings that improved soldier endurance also meant that criminal organizations could transport more weapons with less detection risk. Dr. Elisabeth Hoffmann, a Red Cross observer who had been monitoring small arms proliferation in regional conflicts, requested a meeting at Glock's factory. She arrived with documentation that would haunt him for years to come. "Your pistol is appearing in conflicts from Northern Ireland to the Balkans," she explained, spreading photographs across his conference table. "The reliability you designed for soldiers is being exploited by every armed group that can acquire them." The photographs showed Glock pistols in the hands of paramilitaries, criminal organizations, and terrorist groups who had never been intended users of his technology. Dr. Hoffmann's gentle but persistent questioning forced him to confront implications he had naively ignored. "When you designed this weapon, did you consider how its innovations might be misused?" she asked. Glock found himself without a satisfactory answer. He had focused entirely on solving the Austrian military's technical requirements: reliability, capacity, weight reduction, ease of maintenance. The broader consequences of creating such an effective weapon had simply never entered his calculations. American law enforcement agencies had begun showing intense interest in the Glock 17, and delegations from police departments across the United States were making pilgrimages to his Austrian factory. These visitors brought stories that both gratified and troubled him, Officers described using Glock pistols to defend themselves and civilians in situations where their old revolver's 6-shot capacity would have been inadequate. But they also brought reports of the same weapons appearing in criminal hands with alarming frequency. Captain Michael Reynolds from the Miami Police Department explained the paradox during his factory tour. Your pistol is saving police lives and making police work more dangerous at exactly the same time. The criminals are getting them as fast as we are. By 1985, Glock had become synonymous with law enforcement sidearms across the United States. The plastic frame that had once been ridiculed for feeling cheap now represented the cutting edge of tactical reliability. Police departments frustrated with revolvers that limited them to 6 shots in increasingly violent encounters adopted the high-capacity Austrian pistol in unprecedented numbers. But success carried a personal cost that Glock had never anticipated. Death threats began arriving at his factory and home, forcing him to hire bodyguards and implement security measures that transformed his quiet engineering work into something resembling a military operation. Former business partners who felt excluded from his success made increasingly hostile legal and personal challenges to his empire. The most serious threat came from Charles Hewitt, a former associate who had provided some consultation during the early PAT development. Hewitt's grievances over profit-sharing had escalated into something far more dangerous than corporate disputes. Intelligence warnings from Austrian security services indicated that Hewitt was actively planning violence against Glock and his family. Helga's letters during this period revealed her growing fear and isolation. I married an engineer who wanted to solve technical problems, she wrote. Now we live like prisoners because of what that solution has become. The assassination attempt came on a July morning in 1999 as Glock walked to his car in the parking garage beneath his office building. Hewitt attacked with a hammer and knife, leaving Glock permanently scarred and increasingly reclusive. The physical wounds healed, but the psychological impact of being targeted for violence because of his invention would never fully fade. Standing in his redesigned office with bulletproof windows overlooking the expanded factory complex, Glock contemplated the empire he had built through engineering excellence. The fortune his innovation generated felt hollow against the weight of knowing that his technical genius had made killing more efficient for both protectors and predators. The call came on a September morning in 1993 that would forever alter how Glock understood the global impact of his creation. Dr. Sarah Chen, a trauma surgeon from Sarajevo General Hospital, was speaking at a medical conference in Vienna and had requested an urgent meeting. She arrived at his factory carrying a folder of medical reports and photographs that documented the Glock 17's role in the Bosnian conflict with clinical precision. I need you to understand what your innovation means in a place where neighbors are killing neighbors, she said, her voice carefully controlled. The photographs showed wound patterns that were distinctly different from those caused by traditional military rifles. The Glock 17's 17-round capacity meant that shooting incidents involved many more projectiles, creating injury patterns that overwhelmed medical facilities designed for conventional conflict casualties. Dr. Chen's documentation revealed how the pistol's reliability and ease of use had made it a weapon of choice for ethnic militias throughout the former Yugoslavia. In a single night last month, my hospital received 43 gunshot victims, she explained. 37 of those wounds came from 9mm handguns consistent with your design. The lightweight frame makes them easy to conceal and carry during ethnic cleansing operations. Glock found himself staring at medical reports that quantified his invention's contribution to human suffering with the same mathematical precision he had once applied to engineering problems. Each casualty report represented families destroyed, communities terrorized, and a level of violence that his technical innovation had helped enable. Dr. Chen's presentation continued with intelligence reports showing how the Glock's polymer frame had revolutionized weapons smuggling throughout Eastern Europe. Traditional steel weapons required significant transportation infrastructure and were easily detected at borders. The Glock's synthetic construction allowed it to pass through security systems that had been calibrated during the Cold War for steel-framed weapons. "Your engineering breakthrough has created a new category of conflict," she said. "Urban warfare with easily concealed, high-capacity weapons that can be smuggled and distributed like commercial products." The moment that shattered Glock's remaining illusions about his achievement came when Dr. Chen showed him a photograph from the siege of Srebrenica. Bosnian Serb forces carrying Glock pistols were visible in the background of what would become one of the worst massacres in European history since World War II. The same reliability and precision he had designed to protect Austrian soldiers was being used to execute civilians with systematic efficiency. "I'm not here to blame you personally," Dr. Chen said, observing his obvious distress. "But I need you to understand that innovation carries responsibilities that extend far beyond original intentions." That evening, alone in his office, Glock wrote the first of many letters he would never send. Attempts to process the moral complexity of creating something that served both protection and destruction with equal effectiveness. The technical achievement he had once viewed with pride now felt like a burden that grew heavier with each intelligence report documenting the global spread of his design. Intelligence agencies from NATO countries began providing him with regular briefings on how Glock pistols were being acquired and distributed by criminal organizations worldwide. The same manufacturing innovations that allowed his factory to produce thousands of pistols efficiently also meant that counterfeit versions could be manufactured in facilities with relatively modest technical capabilities. By the mid-1990s, forensic investigators could identify Glock pistols at crime scenes across 6 continents. The 17-round magazine capacity that had impressed Austrian military observers was changing the nature of criminal violence in ways that law enforcement agencies struggled to understand and counter. Captain Antonio Valdez from the Colombian National Police visited Glock's factory in 1994 with documentation of how drug cartels had integrated Glock pistols into their operations. "The reliability you designed for military use has made these weapons the preferred choice for assassination and intimidation," he explained. "They never malfunction when criminals need them to work." The revelation that haunted Glock most deeply came from FBI analysis showing how mass shooting incidents in American schools and public places increasingly involved high-capacity handguns based on his design principles. The same innovations that allowed police officers to defend themselves and others were being used to create casualties on a scale that traditional revolvers could never have achieved. Standing in his factory as night fell over the Austrian countryside, Glock contemplated the global network of violence that carried his name and incorporated his innovations. The precision engineering that had once filled him with professional pride now felt like a technology that had escaped his control and moral intention. The polymer frame he held in his hands, identical to the one that had started this revolution, no longer represented engineering triumph. It had become a symbol of how even the most well-intentioned genius cannot control how the world uses the power of human creativity. The letter arrived at Glock's office in the winter of 2008, 28 years after his prototype had first passed Austrian military trials. It came from Officer Maria Santos of the Los Angeles Police Department, written in careful English with obvious effort and profound gratitude. "Mr. Glock," she wrote, "last month your pistol saved my life and the lives of 3 children when I confronted armed attackers during a school invasion. The 17-round capacity allowed me to stop multiple assailants when 6 shots from an old revolver would never have been enough. I wanted you to know that your creation serves protection as well as destruction. This letter joined hundreds of others in files that Glock maintained in his private office, testimonials from police officers, military personnel, and civilian defenders whose lives had been preserved by the reliability and capacity of his design. Yet for every letter of gratitude, intelligence reports continued arriving that documented his pistol's role in conflicts, assassinations, and mass violence events worldwide. The duality had become impossible to escape or resolve. Dr. Elizabeth Hoffman, now in her 70s, continued to visit his factory annually with updates on global small arms proliferation. Her latest report indicated that Glock pistols had been adopted by military and police forces in over 50 countries, but had also been documented in criminal use across every inhabited continent. "You created something that serves good and evil with equal efficiency," she observed during their final meeting. "That's not a moral failure. It's the fundamental paradox of technological innovation." In 2017, after nearly 4 decades of global success, Glock sold his majority stake in the company to investors who would continue producing pistols based on his original design. The decision came after months of contemplation about legacy and responsibility that had intensified with each passing year. During his farewell address to factory workers, Glock spoke with quiet resignation about the dual nature of his life's work. "I set out to solve a technical problem, creating a more reliable sidearm for those sworn to protect others. Instead, I fundamentally altered the balance of power in human conflict. Police officers go home safer to their families because of this design. But so too has this pistol's presence in the wrong hands multiplied tragedy in ways I never intended. The financial fortune his innovation generated had become secondary to the weight of knowing that his engineering genius had made killing more efficient for both protectors and predators. Bodyguards still accompanied him everywhere, a constant reminder of how creating something powerful attracts both gratitude and hatred from a world that struggles with the implications of technological advancement." In his final interviews, before retreating from public life, Glock attempted to articulate the complex emotions of a man whose technical achievement had reshaped global violence. "I wanted to build a better tool for those who serve justice," he reflected. But tools serve the intentions of those who hold them, not the intentions of those who create them. The Glock 17 remains the most successful pistol design of the past half-century, produced in numbers exceeding the populations of entire nations. Manufacturing facilities on multiple continents continue producing variations of his original concept, each carrying the innovations that began in a small Austrian factory during the cold winter of 1980. Yet for Glock himself, the technical triumph had evolved into something far more complex than engineering success. The polymer frame that had revolutionized firearms design had also revealed fundamental truths about innovation, responsibility, and the uncontrollable nature of technological impact that extended far beyond its creator's original vision or moral intentions. Standing in his private study overlooking the Austrian countryside where his revolution had begun, Glock often returned to examining the original P-80 prototype that had started everything. The black polymer frame still felt alien in his hands after all these years, lighter than tradition demanded, but weighted with consequences that engineering calculations had never anticipated. The workshop air no longer carried the scent of polymer dust and testing compounds, but memory preserved every detail of those early days when innovation seemed like pure achievement. Now, in the quiet of retirement, Glock understood that even the most well-intentioned genius cannot control how the world uses the power of human creativity. The tools we create shape the world, but the world shapes how those tools are used, and sometimes the creator must live with both the salvation and the destruction that carry his name into history. If this story reminded you that even in the darkest times, small acts of humanity still matter, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. In the end, it wasn't just the weapon that endured. It was the reminder that innovation carries responsibilities that extend far beyond engineering specifications, and that the most profound revolutions often emerge not from grand visions, but from the collision between technical possibility and human necessity.